Okay, guys, let's talk about non-Mendelian genetics. Now, non-Mendelian genetics are part of the genetics that don't follow the normal dominant recessive rules. Because remember, everything up until now, it's either been one or the other. You either have the trait or you have a different trait, right? But we know that that's not the way the world works. Like, for example, if you have a person with super curly hair and they have a baby with somebody with super straight hair, then the odds of the baby having wavy hair is pretty good, which means it's not showing one trait or the other, it's showing a blend of the traits. And there's a lot of things in this world that don't follow normal dominant recessive. And so we're going to go through a couple of the examples. The first one being incomplete dominance. Now, incomplete dominance means both alleles, so your letters that you get from your mom and dad, are partially expressed. And that means we get a blend. And this is actually really easy to understand. So let's pretend that we have red flowers and we have white flowers. So what's going to happen if I cross a red flower with a white flower? And you notice that I use different letters this time. Remember, letters are just a placeholder, and so we didn't have to use R's and W's. We could use big R's and little R's, or big W's and little W's. I just thought using two different letters would be easier. But anyway, so if I cross a red flower with a white flower, so here's my red parent, here's my white parent, I do the cross, and look, every offspring is RW, which means 100% of my offspring are going to be pink, because both alleles are partially expressed. I get a blend of them. So now instead of having a red or a white flower, I get pink. So what happens if I cross a pink flower with a pink flower? Well, if I look at the boxes, so here's one parent, here's the other. Say 25% of my offspring will be red, 25% offspring will be white, and 50 will be pink. And so I don't think that's very hard to understand, just the fact that we get a blend now instead of getting one or the other trait. Now, codominance, remember, co means together, so instead of me getting a blend, both of these alleles are equally expressed. You see both of them together. That's where the co comes in. You see them together. So if I took the same example, if I crossed a red flower with a white flower, all of my offspring will have a red and a white allele, but instead of it being pink, I'd have something with red and white spots, because I see both of those alleles together. I don't get a blend, but I see them equally together. Now, one classic example of codominance are blood types, right? And we've all heard of our blood types before. We know that we can have A blood type, B blood type, we can have AB, or we can have O. Now, when we look at blood types, A is a dominant blood type, B is a dominant blood type, which means they are co-dominant together. I don't get some kind of blend of the two, but I see both of them equally, and then we still have O blood, which is recessive. So if I do my genotypes, A blood can either have two A alleles, or it can have an A and an O, because don't forget O is recessive. For B blood type, I can have two Bs, or I can have B and an O allele. For AB blood type, I can only have AB. And then for recessive, I can only have two O's. And so if I crossed a person with blood type AO, so they're showing A blood type, but they're a carrier for O, and I cross them with a blood type AB, then that means, well, this would be blood, or A, and this would be A. So 50% of my offspring would have blood type A. This guy right here, so 25% would have blood type AB. And then this one right here, 25% would have blood type B. So codominance, again, just subtle differences between that and incomplete. Incomplete, I get a blend, versus codominance, I see them together. Now, my other kind of non-Mendelian genetics is just something a little different. We also have these traits that are called sex-linked, okay? Sex-linked traits. So my sex-linked traits Most of our traits are carried on autosomes. And auto, remember, auto means self, and some is talking about chromosome. So they're carried on my autosomes. Those are my pairs 1 through 22. Remember, I have 46 chromosomes, 23 pairs, so 1 through 22. Most of our traits are on autosomes, like traits that aren't dependent upon your sex, like hair color. Is hair color dependent upon sex? No. Those types of traits are found on our autosomes. But we also have sex chromosomes that determine our sex. Now, we do have a few genes that get carried on them. Just as a reminder, sex chromosomes, XX, that's when we get a girl. XY is when we get a boy. Now, a couple little things about this. So some traits are carried on the X chromosome, right? For girls to express a trait on the X, they have to have 2 copies. But for boys, I only need 1 copy to express the trait. So if I look at girls, I actually have 3 options. I can either be XX, which would be my normal girl. I can have this X, and this little stick right here is called a prime, X prime X, which means she carries it, but she doesn't show it because girls need 2 copies. Or I can be X prime, which means my girl has the trait. That's why sex-linked traits were more often to see in boys versus girls, because girls need 2 copies to show it versus boys only need 1. So I look at for boys, I can either have an XY, which gives me a normal boy, or I can have X prime Y, which means that boy has the trait. That's why boys are more often to show sex-linked traits, because they only need 1 copy. So if you think of color blindness, if you know somebody who's colorblind, I bet you it's a boy over a girl. That's because boys you can see the sex-linked traits easier on boys because they only need 1 copy. Or if you think of baldness, right? If you think of somebody who's bald, the first person you think of is a man because they only need 1 copy to show that trait and not 2. So let's pretend we cross a color-blind boy, so X prime Y, and then I cross it with a girl who's not colorblind, but she's a carrier because she only has 1 copy of the trait. So here's my girl, X prime X, and then here's my boy, X prime Y. I do the cross, so X prime. This one would be X prime X. This one would be X prime Y. This one would be XY. So if I look, half of these children will be colorblind, right? Because this box right here, this first one, has 2 X's with 2 primes on them. That means that girl has the trait. And then the box right below, that third box, is an X prime Y, which means that boy will have a trait. This box right here, since it's X prime X, means it's a girl who's a carrier. And then this last box, this XY, means the boy won't have it. Now, if I were thinking about potential questions, I could say, what % of my boys will be colorblind? And in that instance, I would say half of them would be colorblind, because then I'm only looking at my boy boxes, right? And if I look, one of those boys will be colorblind, the other one will not. And then the same thing, I could ask about my girls. What % of my girls will be colorblind? I would have to say 50. I would have to say 50 because out of my 2 girl boxes, only one of them, this first one, will be colorblind. The other one's a carrier. So anyway, looking through it, these are all non-Mendelian. Incomplete, what you need to remember is a blend. That would be the big thing. Codominance, you see both alleles together. That's when you get spots or blood typing. And then sex-linked traits are carried on the X. Girls need 2 copies, boys need 1. And then all of our other traits that we've been talking about for this entire unit are located on your autosomes. All right, I hope that helps.